The cantina on Station Omega-7 was quiet tonight. Most of the workers had gone to their bunks after another long shift mining crystals from the nearby asteroid field. Only a few beings remained scattered across the metal tables, nursing there drinks and keeping to themselves. Commander Zethkar sat alone in the darkest corner of the room, his 4 arms wrapped around a tall glass filled with blue liquid that bubbled and steamed. The Vorthic warrior was massive, even by his species standards. His thick shell bore countless scars from battles across the galaxy. 3 of his 6 eyes had been damaged in combat, leaving him with a twisted, frightening appearance that made other patrons avoid his table. But tonight, Zethkar looked different. Instead of the proud, confident posture of a decorated war hero, he hunched over his drink like a broken old man. His remaining eyes stared into the liquid as if searching for answers to questions. He could not speak aloud. A young Vorthic approached. His table. Hessek was barely past his molting age, his shell still bright and unmarked by battle. He wore the simple gray uniform of a station security guard, but his eyes held the eager gleam of someone who dreamed of military glory. "Commander Zethkar," Hessek said, his voice full of respect. "May I sit with you, sir?" The older warrior looked up slowly. For a moment, his scarred face showed annoyance. Then something shifted in his expression, and he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit if you want, young one," Zethkar said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel grinding together. "But I am not good company tonight." Hessek slid into the chair, his movements quick and nervous. "Sir, I have heard stories about your battles. They say you fought in the Great War against the humans. Is it true that you commanded a dreadnought in the Outer Rim conflicts?" Zethkar's remaining eyes narrowed. He took a long drink from his glass before answering. "I commanded the Vorthic war vessel Doom Bringer. Yes, I fought humans. More than I care to remember." The young guard leaned forward eagerly. "Please, sir, tell me about it. What was it like to face the primitive humans in battle? Did you destroy many of their weak ships?" A strange sound came from Zethkar's throat. It might have been laughter, but it held no humor. Only bitterness and something that sounded almost like fear. "Weak ships," he repeated slowly. "Primitive. Humans. That is what we all thought, Hessek. That is what the High Command told us when they sent us to conquer the human systems. They said it would be easy. They said humans were barely more than animals with simple technology." Zethkar drained his glass and signaled for another. The server, a nervous Centaurian with too many eyes, hurried over with a fresh drink. "The first human ship we encountered was called the U.S. Liberty," Zethkar continued. "It was small, maybe 1/10 the size of my dreadnought. Its hull was made of basic metal alloys. Its weapons were chemical explosives and simple energy beams. By every measure we understood, it should have been destroyed in minutes." Hessek waited, his excitement growing. He expected to hear about a glorious victory, a quick destruction of inferior enemies. The Liberty's captain was named Jake Morrison. Zethkar said, "A human male with brown hair and green eyes. I remember his face because he appeared on our communication screen when we demanded his surrender." The commander paused, his clawed hands tightening around his new drink. "I told him his ship was surrounded. I told him he was outnumbered 50-1. I told him that resistance was pointless, and that if he surrendered, his crew would be treated well according to the laws of warfare." "And he surrendered?" Hessek asked. Zethkar's shell seemed to shudder. He laughed. "This human captain, facing certain death, looked at me through the screen and laughed. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, 'Commander, you clearly don't know much about humans. We don't surrender. We win, or we make sure you regret fighting us.'" The young guard frowned. "That sounds like foolish pride, sir." "That is what I thought," Zethkar agreed. I ordered my gunners to disable their engines and weapons. We would take them prisoner and study their primitive technology. It should have been simple. Zethkar took another drink, his movements slow and deliberate. The Liberty fired everything it had at us. Missiles, energy beams, even chunks of metal, launched from cargo bays. None of it could penetrate our shields. I watched their weapons bounce off our hull like insects striking a mountain. Then what happened, sir? Captain Morrison did something no sane being would attempt. He ordered his helmsman to ram us. Hesek's eyes widened. Ram a dreadnought? But that would be suicide. Exactly, Zethkar said. The Liberty was traveling at full speed, all power diverted from shields to engines. Morrison's ship struck us. Amidships, and the entire vessel exploded on impact. The young guard looked confused. But sir, if they were destroyed, how was that a victory for them? Zethkar's remaining eyes grew distant, as if seeing something far away. The explosion damaged our main reactor. We lost power to weapons and shields. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. What do you mean? Other human ships had detected the battle. They came to investigate, expecting to find wreckage and survivors to rescue. Instead, they found us helpless and the Liberty destroyed. Zethkar paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I expected them to flee. Any rational species would have retreated when faced with a superior force. But humans are not rational, Hesek. The human ships attacked us while we were defenseless. But that's against the laws of warfare, the young guard protested. You cannot attack disabled vessels. Humans do not follow our laws, Zethkar replied. They follow their own code. And their code said that Morrison and his crew had to be avenged. The commander stared into his drink again, lost in memory. The human ships were small, barely more than patrol vessels. But they fought like demons. They targeted our communication arrays first, so we could not call for help. Then they attacked our life support systems. Did they destroy your ship? No. They disabled us completely, then boarded us. But they did not come to take prisoners or steal technology. They came to rescue any survivors from the Liberty, even though they knew there were none. Zethia's voice became strained. I met their leader during the boarding, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, a human female, small even by their standards. She had brown skin and dark hair tied back in a knot. When she found me on the bridge, I expected her to kill me in revenge for Morrison's death. But she didn't. She looked at me with such contempt that I wished she had killed me instead. She said, "You killed good people today, alien." Captain Morrison had a wife and 2 children waiting for him at home. Chief Engineer Parker was 3 days from retirement. Navigator Collins was getting married next month. The young guard listened, in silence, sensing that something important was being revealed. Then Rodriguez said something that haunts me still. She said, "We're going to let you live, Commander. We're going to repair your engines, just enough to get you home. And when you get there, you're going to tell your leaders exactly what happened here. You're going to tell them that humans don't surrender, and we don't forget." Zethkar finished his second drink and set the glass down with a heavy thud. That was my first encounter with humans, Hesek. It was not the last, and it was far from the worst. I learned that day that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong when applied to humans. The young guard sat back in his chair, his earlier excitement replaced by uncertainty. But sir, how could such a small, primitive species be so dangerous? Zethkar looked at him with tired eyes. Because they are not fighting for territory or resources or glory, young one. They are fighting for each other. And there is nothing more dangerous in the universe than a being who fights not for themselves, but for those they love. Hesek ordered another drink for himself and waited as Commander Zethkar stared into the empty bottom of his glass. The cantina had grown even quieter, with only the hum of the station's life support systems breaking the silence. "Sir, they," young guard said carefully, "you mentioned that the Liberty was not your worst encounter with humans. What happened after that?" Zethkar's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile, but held no warmth. "The High Command did not believe my report. They said I was making excuses for losing a dreadnought to primitive aliens. They said humans were lucky, nothing more. So they sent me back with a larger fleet." The commander gestured for another drink, his movements slower now as the alcohol affected his system. 3 months later, I found myself commanding 5 war vessels in the human system they called Alpha Centauri. Our mission was simple: capture their colony ships and study their technology. Take prisoners for questioning. Show them the power of the Vorthic Empire. Hessek leaned forward, fascinated despite his growing unease. We detected a human transport vessel near the edge of the system. It was huge, maybe twice the size of my flagship. Our sensors showed it carried 50,000 humans, mostly civilians fleeing from their homeworld. "An easy target," Hessek said. "That is what I thought," Zethkar agreed. The ship was called the New Hope. It had minimal weapons and no military escort. I sent a boarding party of 200 warriors to take control of the vessel. The commander paused to drink, his remaining eyes unfocused. The boarding party was led by Captain Vexhall, one of our finest commanders. He had conquered 12 worlds and never lost a single battle. I expected him to secure the ship within an hour. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. The humans did not panic when we boarded their ship. They did not run or hide or beg for mercy. Instead, they fought back with everything they had. Zethkar's voice grew quieter, more strained. The first thing that surprised us was their organization. These were not soldiers, Hessek. They were farmers and teachers and shopkeepers and children. But they had leaders, and they had plans. The young guard frowned. Plans for what? For exactly this situation. It seems humans prepare for the worst possible outcomes, even when they hope for the best. The ship's captain was a human named Steve Johnson. He was old, maybe 60 Earth. Years with gray hair and kind eyes. He looked like someone's grandfather. Zethkar took another drink before continuing. Captain Johnson appeared on our communication screen, just as our boarding pods attached to his hull. He looked directly at me and said, "Commander, you are making a mistake. These people under my protection are innocent civilians. Turn around now, and no one has to die today." Did you listen to his warning? I laughed at him. I told him his ship was surrounded, and that resistance would only make things worse for his people. Johnson just nodded slowly and said, "I was hoping you would say that." Then he cut the communication. The commander's shell seemed to tremble slightly. Our boarding parties entered the New Hope through the cargo bays. They expected to find frightened civilians cowering in their quarters. Instead, they found traps. What kind of traps? Every kind you can imagine. The humans had turned their own ship into a fortress. They had welded metal plates across corridors to create choke points. They had rigged explosive devices from mining equipment. They had even filled sections with toxic gases from their industrial systems. Zethek listened in growing amazement. But the worst part was not the traps. It was the humans themselves. A woman named Carol Martinez held off 30 Vorthic warriors in the engineering section for 4 hours. She was a maintenance worker, not a soldier. She used cutting tools and repair equipment to fight trained killers. Zethi's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Martinez had 2 children with her, a boy and a girl, maybe 10 Earth years old. When our warriors finally cornered her, she made them choose. They could capture her, or they could try to take her. Children, but they could not do both. What did she do? She destroyed the ship's main power coupling. The explosion killed her and 15 of our warriors. But it also shut down the artificial gravity throughout the vessel. The humans had trained for zero-gravity combat. We had not. The young guard was silent, trying to process what he was hearing. The fighting continued for 18 hours. Every section of the ship became a battlefield. The humans used furniture as weapons. They threw boiling water from the kitchen. They even trained their small domestic animals to attack our warriors. Zethkar gestured for another drink, his movements becoming unsteady. The children were the worst part. Human offspring are not like ours, Hessek. They do not simply obey adults and wait for instructions. They think for themselves, and they fight for themselves. Children fought against your warriors? A human boy named Tommy Wilson, maybe 12 years old, disabled 3 of our boarding pods by crawling through ventilation shafts and cutting power cables. He was small enough to reach places our warriors could not follow. The commander's remaining eyes seemed to glaze over with memory. When we finally cornered the boy, he looked up at Captain Vexhall and said, "My dad was a soldier. He taught me that good people don't give up, even when things look impossible." Then the child activated a homemade explosive device. Hessek felt his stomach turn. He killed himself? He killed himself and 5 of our warriors. A child, Hessek. A human child chose death over surrender. The cantina seemed to grow colder around them. Captain Vexhall contacted me after 6 hours of fighting. He said the humans were fighting like demons. He said they would rather die than be captured. He requested permission to retreat. Did you give it? I ordered him to complete the mission. I told him we needed prisoners and information. I told him the honor of the Vorthic Empire depended on victory. Zethkar finished his drink in one gulp. 3 hours later, Captain Johnson appeared on our screens again. He looked tired, and there was blood on his uniform. But his eyes were still calm and determined. He said, "Commander, you have killed many good people today. My ship is damaged beyond repair. We cannot escape, and we cannot fight much longer." The young guard waited for the rest of the story. Then Johnson said something that still gives me nightmares. He said, "But before we die, we are going to send a message to every human ship in this sector. We are going to tell them exactly what you did here, and they are going to hunt you down. What did you do?" I tried to jam their communications, but humans are clever with technology. They had hidden transmitters throughout their ship. While we were fighting in the corridors, they were broadcasting everything to their fleet. Zethkar's voice became hollow. Captain Johnson kept his word. The New Hope was destroyed, but not before sending detailed information about our ships, our weapons, and our tactics to dozens of human vessels. So the humans got their revenge. Revenge is too simple a word for what happened next. Within one day, every human ship in the sector was hunting us. They coordinated their attacks like a pack of predators. They knew exactly where to hit us to cause maximum damage. The commander looked directly at Hessek with his remaining eyes. We lost 4 of our 5 ships in the next week. The humans did not just defeat us, they studied us. They learned from fighting the New Hope's defenders. They became better at killing us with every battle. How did you escape? I did not escape. The humans captured me when my flagship was boarded, but they did not kill me, and they did not torture me for information. Instead, they made me watch recordings of the New Hope's final battle. Zethkar's shell trembled again. They wanted me to understand what we had done. Captain Johnson and his people were not warriors. They were families trying to find a new home. But when we threatened them, they became something else entirely. What did they become? Something that every species in the galaxy should fear. They became humans who had nothing left to lose. The cantina's lights dimmed automatically as the station entered its night cycle. Most of the remaining patrons had left, leaving only Commander Zethkar and Hessek sitting in the growing darkness. The young guard had stopped drinking, but the veteran commander continued to pour the blue liquid down his throat, as if trying to drown his memories. "Sir," Hessek said quietly, "how many more battles did you fight against the humans?" Zethkar let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the empty room. "Battles? You still think we fought battles, young one? What came after the New Hope was not warfare as any civilized species understands it. It was something else entirely." The commander's remaining eyes stared at the table between them. After losing 4 ships to human revenge attacks, the High Command decided we needed a different approach. They sent me to conquer an entire human world called New Terra. It was a farming colony with maybe 2 million people and no military bases. "That sounds easier than fighting their ships," Hessek said. "That is what we thought. We had orbital bombardment weapons that could destroy cities from space. We had ground forces with advanced armor and energy weapons. The humans had farming, equipment, and simple projectile guns." Zethkar paused to drink again, his movements becoming more unsteady. "We began with standard occupation procedures. We destroyed their communication satellites and government buildings. We landed troops in the major cities and demanded surrender from the local leaders. Did they surrender? The planetary governor was a woman named Lisa Hayes. She was maybe 40 Earth years old, with blonde hair and blue eyes. She looked like she should have been growing flowers in a garden, not leading a planet." The commander's voice grew darker. "Governor Hayes appeared on every screen in the capital city when we demanded her surrender. She stood in front of the burning ruins of the government building and said something I will never forget." Hessek waited, sensing another terrifying revelation. She said, "To every human listening to this broadcast, remember that we are not just fighting for our world. We are fighting for the memory of everyone who died on the New Hope. We are fighting for our children's future. And we are going to win, because that is what humans do." What happened next? Nothing happened. That was the problem. We expected organized resistance, military units, defensive positions. Instead, the humans seemed to vanish. Zethkar gestured weakly with one of his 4 arms. "Our ground forces occupied the cities without firing a shot. We set up command posts and began processing the civilian population. For 3 days, everything was quiet. We thought we had won, but you hadn't. On the 4th day, our supply convoys started disappearing, not destroyed, not captured. They simply vanished without a trace. 20 vehicles would leave the main base, and only 15 would arrive at their destination. No distress calls, no signs of battle." A young guard frowned. "How is that possible?" The humans had done something we never expected. They had turned their entire planet into a weapon. Zethkar's voice dropped to a whisper. Every farmer knew the location of our patrols. Every shopkeeper reported our movements. Every child playing in the streets was actually a spy gathering information. "But surely your warriors could handle civilian resistance." "You still do not understand, Hessek. These were not civilians anymore. They were something new, something that had never existed in the galaxy before." The commander struggled to find the right words. There was a human named Chris Walker. He had been a teacher before the invasion. He taught young children how to read and write. When we occupied his town, he seemed to cooperate fully with our forces. So he was not a threat? Walker volunteered to help our supply officers understand local geography. He showed them the best routes through the mountains, the safest river crossings, the most efficient paths between cities. Zethkar's shell shuddered. It took us 2 weeks to realize that every route Walker recommended led our convoys into carefully prepared ambush sites. This mild-mannered teacher had been systematically directing our forces into traps. What kind of traps? The humans used their farming knowledge against us. They dug irrigation ditches that looked like roads until our heavy vehicles fell into them. They planted explosive devices in fruit trees that detonated when our scouts took shelter in the shade. The commander's voice became strained with remembered fear. They used their weather knowledge to predict storms, then attacked us when our sensors were blocked by rain and wind. They used their understanding of local animal behavior to drive herds of livestock into our camps during the night. Hessek listened in growing horror. But the worst part was their psychological warfare. They knew we were listening to their communications, so they made sure we heard things that would terrify us. What kind of things? Stories, Hessek. Stories about human history. About wars they had fought against each other on their homeworld. Zethkar. Remaining eyes grew wide with remembered terror. They told stories about something called the Battle of Stalingrad, where humans fought each other for months in the ruins of a frozen city. They described how soldiers would fight for individual buildings, sometimes for weeks, before moving on to the next target. The young guard felt his skin crawl. They told stories about wars that lasted for years, where entire generations grew up knowing nothing but conflict. They described weapons that could destroy entire cities, and how humans had actually used them against each other. Why would they tell you such things? Because they wanted us to understand what we were fighting. They wanted us to know that humans had survived wars that would have destroyed any other species. They wanted us to realize that compared to what humans did to each other, we were nothing special. Zethkar finished another drink and immediately ordered another. The most terrifying story was about something called the Holocaust. It was not even a war, just one group of humans systematically trying to destroy another group. The details were so horrible that many of my warriors requested transfers to other worlds. How could such violence exist? That was exactly the point, young one. If humans could survive that level of brutality from their own species, what hope did we have of breaking their will? The commander's voice became hollow. After 3 months of occupation, we had lost 60% of our ground forces. Not to military action, but to an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Did you retreat? We tried to negotiate. I personally met with Governor Hayes under a flag of truce. She agreed to meet me in the ruins of a school that had been destroyed in our initial bombardment. Zethkar's shell trembled again. Hayes sat across from me at a broken desk in a classroom where human children had once learned mathematics and literature. The walls were covered with drawings the children had made before we came. What did she say? She asked me about my family. She wanted to know if I had children, if I had a mate waiting for me at home. When I told her yes, she nodded and said she understood why I wanted to end the fighting. The commander paused, his voice becoming barely audible. Then Hayes pointed to the children's drawings on the walls and said, "Commander, every one of these pictures was drawn by a child who is now dead because of your invasion. Their parents are dead. Their teachers are dead. Their friends are dead." What was her point? She said, "You can leave our world anytime you want. You can go home to your family and forget this ever happened. But we cannot leave because this is our home. And we cannot forget because forgetting would dishonor our dead." Zethkar looked directly at Hessek with his remaining eyes. Then Governor Hayes said something that ended the war for me. She said, "You are fighting to conquer us. We are fighting to exist. Guess which motivation is stronger? Did you withdraw your forces? I tried to, but by then it was too late. The humans had already won." The station's artificial gravity fluctuated slightly as the massive mining equipment outside continued its work. Commander Zethkar barely noticed, lost in memories that seemed to grow darker with each passing moment. Hessek had given up trying to drink, his stomach too unsettled by the stories he was hearing. "Sir," the young guard said carefully, You said the humans had already won on New Terra. What did you mean? Zethkar's scarred face twisted into an expression of bitter admiration. While we were busy trying to control their planet, the humans were learning everything about us. They studied our technology, our tactics, our weaknesses. They turned our own occupation into a training program for their military. The commander gestured weakly toward the viewport, where stars glittered in the darkness beyond the station. 3 months after we abandoned New Terra, human ships began appearing throughout our territory. Not just 1 or 2 vessels, but entire fleets. They had built a war machine using the knowledge they gained from fighting us. How many ships did they have? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. But that was not the frightening part. The frightening part was how they used them. Zethkar ordered another drink, his movements becoming increasingly unsteady. The human fleet was commanded by a woman named Patricia Brooks. She was a general, maybe 50 Earth years old, with gray hair and steel-colored eyes. She looked like she had been born to fight wars. What made her so dangerous? General Brooks understood something about warfare that we had never considered. She did not try to defeat us in honorable combat. Instead, she attacked our ability to believe in ourselves. Hessek frowned, not understanding. The first human attack came at Kepler Station, one of our most important supply bases. It was defended by a full battle fleet and protected by energy. Shields that could stop any known weapon. The commander paused to drink, his remaining eyes unfocused. General Brooks sent a single ship to attack the station. Just 1 vessel against an entire fleet. We thought it was a mistake or a suicide mission. What happened? The ship was called the Defender. Its captain was a human named Rick Thompson, a man with brown hair and a scar across his left cheek. He looked like he had been fighting battles his entire life. Zethkar's voice grew quieter. Captain Thompson broadcast a message to every ship in the system before beginning his attack. He said, "This is for Captain Morrison and the crew of the Liberty. This is for the families aboard the New Hope. This is for every human who died." Because aliens thought we were weak. 1 ship against an entire fleet? The Defender was already damaged when it arrived. Its hull was cracked, its weapons were barely functional, and its life support systems were failing. Any sane commander would have retreated immediately. The young guard waited for the rest of the story. Instead, Captain Thompson ordered his crew to attack the largest battleship in our fleet. His ship was falling apart around him, but he refused to give up. Zethkar's shell trembled with remembered awe. I watched the battle from the command deck of my own vessel. The Defender's engines were held together with metal patches and determination. Its weapons officer, a human named Danny Clark, was manually targeting our ships because his computer systems had failed. How could they fight in such conditions? Their engineer was a woman named Lisa Park. She kept their ship running by replacing broken parts with pieces torn from other systems. When the main reactor began to fail, she climbed inside the radiation chamber to repair it by hand. The commander's remaining eyes grew wide. Park knew she would die from radiation poisoning, but she stayed in that chamber for 2 hours to keep the ship fighting. She saved her crew and completed the mission, knowing it would cost her life. What was the mission? Captain Thompson was not trying to destroy our fleet. He was trying to prove that humans could not be stopped by superior numbers or better technology. Zethkar's voice became barely audible. The Defender rammed the command ship of our fleet. Both vessels were destroyed, but the explosion damaged 3 other battleships and killed over 2,000 Vorthic warriors. But surely that was the end of their attack? That was just the beginning. While we were dealing with the Defenders. Attack! 50 more human ships appeared throughout our territory. They had been waiting for Thompson's signal. The commander gestured helplessly with his 4 arms. Every human ship was commanded by someone who had lost family or friends to our forces. They fought not for territory or glory, but for revenge. And revenge, Hessek, is the most powerful motivation in the universe. What happened to your fleets? We tried to fight them using traditional tactics. We formed battle lines, coordinated our attacks, followed established military doctrine. The humans ignored all of that. Zethkar's voice grew strained. Human ships would pretend to retreat, then turn and attack when we followed them. They would hide behind asteroids and ambush our supply convoys. They would even ram our vessels with their escape pods when their ships were destroyed. That sounds like madness. It was madness, but it was effective madness. We lost 17 major battles in 6 months, not because the humans had better weapons, but because they were willing to do things no civilized species would consider. The commander paused to drink again, his movements becoming increasingly unsteady. The worst battle was at the Proxima Junction, where we thought we had trapped a human fleet. We outnumbered them 3-1 and had them surrounded. Did you destroy them? The human commander was a woman named Karen Stone. She was an admiral, maybe 45 Earth years old, with red hair and green eyes. She looked at our superior forces and did something that still gives me nightmares. What did she do? Admiral Stone broadcast a message to every ship in both fleets. She said, "Today, we end this war. Not because we have to, but because we choose. T.O., we are going to show you what humans are really capable of when we stop holding back." Zethkar's remaining eyes grew distant with terror. Then Stone gave an order that defied everything we understood about warfare. She told her entire fleet to attack simultaneously, using every weapon they had, regardless of the consequences. What consequences? Human ships began self-destructing. To take out our vessels, captains would order their crews to evacuate, then ram their empty ships into our battle stations. Entire squadrons would coordinate suicide attacks against our command ships. The young guard felt sick to his stomach. But the most terrifying part was not their willingness to die. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat. Even when their ships were destroyed, even when their crews were killed, they kept fighting. How? Do you fight when you're already dead? Human escape pods were equipped with explosives. When our ships tried to rescue survivors, the pods would detonate. When we tried to capture damaged human vessels, they would explode as our boarding parties approached. Zethkar's voice became hollow. Admiral Stone's flagship was the last human ship destroyed in that battle. As it was breaking apart, she appeared on our communication screens one final time. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, and her ship was on fire around her. What did she say? She said, "Commander Zethkar, I know you're listening. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that humans chose to die rather than surrender. And I want you to ask yourself, what kind of species would rather face extinction than accept defeat?" The commander finished his drink in one gulp. Then Admiral Stone detonated her ship's reactor core. The explosion was so powerful that it destroyed 2 of our battleships and damaged 5 others. Did that end the battle? It ended the war, not because we had won, but because we finally understood what we were fighting. Zethkar looked directly at Hessek with his remaining eyes. We were not fighting an enemy that could be defeated. We were fighting an enemy that would rather die than lose. The cantina had become completely empty except for Commander Zethkar and Hessek. Even the server had retreated to the back room, leaving the 2 Vorthik alone with their drinks and the weight of terrible memories. The veteran commander sat, slumped in his chair, his scarred shell reflecting the dim emergency lighting that had activated during the station's night cycle. Hessek had not spoken for several minutes, trying to process everything he had heard. The eager young guard who had approached the table hours earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he had aged years in a single evening. "Sir," Hessek finally whispered, "how did the war end? Did we finally defeat the humans?" Zethkar let out a sound that might have been laughter, but it held no humor. Only exhaustion and something that sounded like shame. "Defeat them? Young one, you still do not understand what I have been trying to tell you. We did not defeat the humans. They defeated us so completely that we surrendered." The young guard's eyes widened in shock. "The mighty Vorthic Empire surrendered to primitive humans?" "Primitive," Zethkar repeated slowly. "That word has lost all meaning to me. How can you call a species primitive when they accomplish what no other race in the galaxy has ever done?" The commander struggled to sit up straighter in his chair. After the battle at Proxima Junction, the High Command called an emergency session. For the first time in our history, we were facing an enemy that we could not understand or predict. What did they decide? They decided to end the war using our most powerful weapon, something called the Planet Cracker, a device that could destroy entire worlds from orbit. Zethkar's remaining eyes grew distant. The target was Earth itself, the human homeworld. We thought that if we destroyed their planet of origin, the scattered human fleets would lose their will to fight. That sounds like a logical strategy. Logic had nothing to do with what happened next. When we announced our intention to destroy Earth, something changed in every human we encountered. The commander paused to order another drink, though his movements were becoming dangerously unsteady. Before, humans had fought desperately, but with some restraint. They had tried to minimize casualties when possible, had followed basic rules of warfare, had even treated our prisoners with respect. What changed? They stopped caring about consequences. They stopped caring about survival. They stopped caring about anything except preventing us from reaching Earth. Zethkar's voice became strained with remembered terror. Human ships began appearing everywhere in our territory simultaneously. Not just military vessels, but cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining ships, anything that could carry weapons or explosives. How many ships? Thousands, maybe millions. It seemed like every human in the galaxy had decided to become a soldier. The young guard listened in growing horror. But the most terrifying thing was not their numbers. It was their coordination. Every human ship, from massive battle cruisers to tiny personal craft, moved with perfect unity toward a single goal. What goal? To prevent us from reaching Earth, no matter the cost. They formed a living barrier around their homeworld, using their own bodies and ships as shields. Zethkar's shell trembled as he continued. The human commander in charge of Earth's defense was Admiral Karen Stone. Yes, the same woman who had died at Proxima Junction. Or so we thought. She survived the explosion? Barely. Stone had been rescued by her crew seconds before her ship exploded. She was more machine than flesh by then, kept alive by medical devices and sheer determination. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper. Admiral Stone appeared on our communication screens as our planet Cracker approached Earth. She was sitting in a command chair surrounded by life support equipment, her body broken, but her eyes still burning with that terrible human fire. "What did she say?" She said, "Commander Zethkar, you have made a mistake that will haunt your species for generations. You have threatened the one thing that every human will die to protect. Our home." Zethkar finished his drink and set the glass down with shaking hands. Then Stone said something that ended the war forever. She said, "You want to destroy Earth? You will have to go through every human who has ever lived. And we are all here, waiting for you." What did she mean? She meant exactly what she said. Every human fleet in the galaxy had come home. Millions of ships surrounded Earth in defensive formations that stretched for light years in every direction. The commander's remaining eyes grew wide with remembered awe. But they were not just defending Hessig. They were broadcasting. Every human ship was sending out signals that carried the stories of everyone who had died in the war. What kind of stories? The story of Captain Morrison and the Liberty. The story of the families aboard the New Hope. The story of Governor Hayes and the children of New Terra. The story of every human who had given their life to stop us. Zethkar's voice became barely audible. They wanted us to know the names and faces of everyone we had killed. They wanted us to understand that every human death had made the survivors stronger and more determined. Did you attack Earth? We tried. The planet cracker was the most powerful weapon ever built by the Vorthic Empire. It could crack a world's crust and destroy all life within hours. The commander paused, his voice becoming hollow. As we prepared to fire, Admiral Stone gave one final order to the human fleets. She said, "Today, we show the galaxy what it means to be human. We do not surrender. We do not retreat. We do not compromise when our home is threatened." What happened next? Every human ship in the defensive formation began moving toward our planet cracker, not to attack it, but to shield Earth with their own hulls. Zethkar's shell shuddered with remembered terror. Millions of humans, from children barely old enough to pilot small craft to grandparents who had come out of retirement, formed a living wall between our weapon and their homeworld. They used themselves as shields. They used themselves as shields, knowing they would all die when we fired. Parents said goodbye to their children over open communication channels. Spouses made final promises to each other. Entire families prepared to die together rather than let their world be destroyed. The young guard felt tears forming in his eyes. But the most devastating thing was not their willingness to sacrifice themselves. It was the absolute certainty in their voices that their deaths would mean something. What do you mean? Admiral Stone's final message was broadcast to every ship in both fleets. She said, "We are not dying in vain. We are dying so that the idea of humanity will survive. And as long as that idea exists somewhere in the galaxy, we will never truly be defeated." Zethkar looked directly at Hessig with his remaining eyes. At that moment, I understood what we were really fighting. Not just a species, but an idea. The idea that some things are worth dying for. The idea that freedom is more important than survival. The idea that love is stronger than fear. Did you fire the planet cracker? I gave the order to withdraw. The High Command called me a coward and a traitor, but I knew something they did not understand. What did you know? I knew that if we destroyed Earth, we would not defeat humanity. We would make it immortal. Every species in the galaxy would remember the race that chose extinction over surrender. The commander struggled to stand, his movements unsteady from alcohol and exhaustion. 3 days later, the Vorthic Empire formally surrendered to the human forces. We agreed to withdraw from all human territory and to never again wage aggressive war against any species. What happened to Admiral Stone? She lived to see the peace treaty signed. Then she died quietly in a hospital bed, surrounded by the crews who had served under her. Zethkar began walking toward the exit, his steps uncertain. But before she died, Stone said something that haunts me still. She said, "Commander, we have taught the galaxy an important lesson. We have shown them that humans do not fight for conquest or glory. We fight for each other. And that makes us the most dangerous species that has ever existed." The young guard hurried to catch up with the veteran commander. "Sir, what happened to the humans after the war?" Zethkar paused at the cantina's entrance, his scarred face reflecting. "The corridor lights beyond. They went back to fighting each other, Hessig. Back to their civil wars and territorial disputes and political conflicts. But why would they do that after proving they could work together?" The commander looked back at the young guard with an expression of infinite sadness. Because that is what makes them human. They fight against any threat to their freedom, even if that threat comes from other humans. And somehow, that thought terrifies me more than anything else they did during the war. As Zethkar disappeared into the station's corridors, Hessek remained standing alone in the empty cantina, finally, understanding why veterans spoke of humans only in whispers.